Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. As per usual in the mornings, Lin Li logged in on his smurf account, which was a mage, the first thing after he went online. Bright Moon City was particularly busy on Sundays. The continuous stream of players was more than double in number when compared to other days. It was overcrowded even in the private warehouse, where the fees were more expensive. Could you please help? Lin Li finally made his way to Sualan and was about to ask the pretty administrator for help in getting his mail item. But he was pushed away from the back before he could finish his sentence. Didn't you see the words outside clearly? This is a private warehouse. What is a low-level player like you doing here? Those words came from a level 40-something warrior who was followed by a group of 4 or 5 players. He seemed to be the leader of their small team. After the warrior had spoken, the rest of the players expressed their discontent one after another. Something's wrong with this low-level guy, he's coming here and taking up a space for nothing. Who knows? Maybe he thinks the rich are here and so would like to get some money for a potion to level up. Why not go to the auction house for money? That's where all the rich men are. If anyone happens to be in a good mood and throws some gold coins your way, you will never have to worry about not getting enough money for the level-up potion. Lin Li only glanced at these wasps, then once again calmly wedged his way through to reach Sualan. Would you help me get the mail items posted yesterday? Sure, please wait. The onlookers watched as various mine ingots were being taken out of the private warehouse. There were the common mithril and thorium, and also rare adamantine and fiend iron. The sheen unique to magical metal sparkled in the private warehouse, dazzling the eyes of the players. The commotion died down instantly, and only sounds of players swallowing their saliva could be heard in the private warehouse. The players had yet to shift their gazes away from the bulk of ingots when the pretty administrator took out another pile of stuff from the warehouse. Over 100 pieces of black dragon skin stacked neatly together. The fine and closely woven dragon scales were breathtakingly loosened under the sheen of the magical metals. This was genuine black dragon skin. It was the perfect combination of magical and physical defense. Gear made from the dragon skin was of a legendary scale at the very least. Hundreds of black dragon skin pieces meant hundreds of pieces of legendary gear at the very least. And this was not the end. Beneath the stack of black dragon skin were over 20 pieces of smelted divinity metals. The entire private warehouse seethed with excitement at the sight of these divinity metals. Look, these look like the legendary divinity metals. Look like? These are the divinity metals. Oh, God. More than 20 pieces. Did this low-level mage just rob a dragon? The guy had guessed it half right. Lin Li had indeed raided a dragon's lair. But at the same time, while raiding the dragon's lair, he had finished off the dragon of destruction Azardas. There was no lack of professional blacksmiths in the crowd. No one knew the value of the divinity metals better than them. The properties of equipment made out of divinity metals might not stand out in the beginning, but the longer you use it and the higher the level you attain, the more its fearful growth characteristics would show, albeit slowly. Many professional blacksmiths had predicted on official forums that if a player began using equipment made out of divinity metals at level 1, then when he reached level 70, the equipment could reach an epic level at the minimum even if it might not be an artifact. Was this beast intending to give anyone a way out at all, having over 20 divinity metals out at once? The players could only watch as Lin Li swept the 20 pieces of divinity metals into his bag. Their expressions ones of those who had witnessed their wives entering a hotel with other guys. But then, Sualan retrieved a scroll from the warehouse yet again, and all life had escaped from the player's eyes. He was a beast capable of producing 2 pieces of epic equipment at ease, and in addition, possessed over 100 pieces of dragon skin and over 20 pieces of divinity metals. What else could he not do? However, everyone had a breakdown the time the scroll was handed over to Lin Li. The wishes spell. That is the scroll of wishes, only players who knew their stuff exclaimed as the scroll was passed. How is that possible? Did you see it correctly? It really is. That is really the scroll of wishes. The private warehouse had just quieted down for a few minutes, but the appearance of the scroll threw the place into a frenzy again. Powerful might be an understatement in this case. Having the scroll of wishes meant the player could tell the system Lord one wish. As long as the wish was not against the rules of the game, anything could be granted. The player could wish for an endless pool of wealth or the most powerful equipment. He could also wish for the Lord to kill any legendary creature for him, or even ask for a vast land with rich natural resources to build his own kingdom on. At this time, the looks cast on Lin Li had a certain degree of other meanings to it. But Lin Li heeded them not. He stretched out 2 fingers and lightly picked up the scroll, put it in his bag, and strode out of the private warehouse. As Lin Li walked along the canal towards the trade zone, there were dozens of men with devil tails trailing behind him. They really came along. Lin Li glanced back and couldn't help but feel excited. Playing bandits without looking into whom they'd be dealing with. They had better follow closely. Just wait till I settle the business on hand, I'll be putting on my hunter form for a good talk with them. In reality, Lin Li's hunter form was stationed in the auction house at the moment. He was a super hunter holding the legendary weapon, Stars of Fury. The mage was just a smurf account he used in the warehouse. However, he seemed to have an extraordinary luck. He had created a mage smurf intending to use it as a warehouse, but he had gotten one with top levels of mental and intellectual abilities, a mage of the highest grade. Lin Li always had trouble deciding what to do with such an exceptional smurf. Finally, he thought he couldn't let such an outstanding smurf go to waste. Hence, he began training the smurf in various kinds of professions. The fellow was one of a hardy character. It was either no training at all, or all training at once. As long as it was a life skill to be learned, he'd learn it all. Now, a level 1 mage like him had mastered all 5 basic skills: forging, alchemy, pharmaceutics, magical enchantment, and inscription, to the highest level. In addition to these, his knowledge on medicine, minerals, cooking, scroll making, and other general skills had also increased beyond the highest level. Lin Li took his time to walk to the trade zone. He stopped in front of a blacksmith shop. Over 100 pieces of mithril poured noisily into the furnace. Lin Li waited on the side for 2 minutes, then, disregarding whether the mithril was melted, he took one piece out and began hammering once it was on the anvil. The players behind him saw in between fits of sparks mithril valued at over 100 gold coins hammered into a piece of scrap iron in an instant. Top-class blacksmiths used mithril in their forging, hence it was natural to turn mithril into scrap iron. However, it made no difference to Lin Li whether the mithril was hammered into scrap iron. He was neither short on those few hundred gold coins, nor was he short on those few pieces of mithril. In fact, he had his own private mineral veins in places like the glistening plains and Thousand Pinnacles, but no one knew about it. What was the big deal about scraping a few pieces of mithril as long as the skill points increased? Lin Li began busying himself again in the midst of those blacksmiths looking as if they were going to cough up blood. He took the mithril pieces one after another, and after using up almost half an hour, finally managed to scrap all 100 of them. Of course, his forging skills had improved significantly. Right after mithril was thorium, then fiend iron, which was followed by adamantine. After the 1,000,000 gold coins worth of minerals was hammered into scraps, the system prompt tone that was ever so pleasant to the ears rang out. Congratulations! You have advanced to become the master of forging. Lin Li massaged his aching shoulder. He took a look back at the stupefied onlookers before packing his tools and turning in the direction of the pharmacy. Again, another 1,000,000 gold coins worth of herbs smashed and an advancement to become the master of pharmaceutics. Followed by metallurgy, and magical enchantment, and finally inscription. It was already noon when Lin Li finally reached the mastery level for all 5 skills. The group of players who had followed behind watched in shock as they witnessed Lin Li ravaging the materials. They had felt pity for him at the beginning, but were completely numb by the time he finished. The onlookers even started guessing whether Lin Li came from some rich family and took to gaming to vent his frustrations after encountering some stress at home. Lin Li finally stopped to catch his breath after successfully upgrading his skills to the mastery level. Just when everyone thought he'd finally call it a day, he took out the scroll of wishes from his bag. What is he trying to do? The power of the scroll of wishes was almost terrifying. Lin Li had just taken the scroll out when the players behind him made all possible preparations for a formidable enemy. After all, not only did this fellow not seem normal from the start, he was holding the scroll of wishes, the freakiest item of all. Should he take things too hard and ask the system lord for a huge massacre, they'd be digging their own graves standing here. You think too highly of yourselves. Lin Li glanced at the players who looked as if they met their mortal enemy. Did he have nothing else to do other than using the scroll of wishes on them? Couldn't they be more self-aware and decide if they were worth the price? As the scroll of wishes gently unfolded, a rainbow appeared suddenly on the skies of Bright Moon City. As the colorful rays shone down lightly, the whole city seemed to be enshrouded in a dream. A majestic voice rang through the solemn and divine choir, a voice that appeared to come from afar yet nearby at the same time. What is your wish? Lin Li gazed at the rainbow. He hesitated slightly before taking a deep breath, then said, "My wish is to increase the levels of all my life skills." The instant the wish was made, the rainbow transformed into numerous beams, descending gradually from the sky like a seven-colored ribbon, wrapping Lin Li up. Lin Li could vividly feel that with every breath he took, it was as if there were countless beams infused into his body. As the last beam was absorbed, limitless knowledge gushed from his brain. Forging, alchemy, pharmaceutics, magical enchantment, and inscription, and even general knowledge in medicinal, mineral, and other categories. These seemed to be with him from birth, integrated with the existing memories he had, and he had them at his fingertips. Lin Li checked his skill form. 4 of the main skills had indeed reached the level of a guru, and most of the general skills were also beyond the level of a master. Thinking back to the year since the opening of the Endless World, there had never been a guru well-versed in all 5 series, even a master in one was hard to find. Life skills were incomparable to individual levels. As long as you put enough time into gaining individual levels by defeating monsters and completing missions constantly, you could accumulate enough experience points to level up. However, once you had reached the highest level for a life skill, it would be extremely difficult to make any progress. Only powerful characters like Lin Li would think of smashing top-grade materials to earn skill points. Thinking back, he had spent almost 5 million gold coins on these 5 basic skills. Other than Lin Li, who had just raided a dragon's lair, who else could afford it? The mastery level was more like a division. When one had reached the mastery level, it was not a matter of money anymore. Perhaps there wouldn't be the slightest increase in your skills even if you had succeeded in forging 10,000 times, but a failure in forging might allow you to obtain a huge improvement in skills. No one would dare say there would be a day where he could reach the level of a guru, even when there was only a small gap to overcome to achieve it. Of course, the difference between a guru and a master was a vast chasm. The mastery level would only allow you to create legendary items, and there might only be one success in 1,000 tries. But at the guru level, you could create legendary items at will. You could even create epic items, though there would still be a certain rate of failure. However, a guru could not be mentioned in the same breath as a master. As for legendary items, it was not something the mortals could imagine. Someone who was able to create artifacts, no matter what profession he was in, was a person there'd only be one title for, the Divine Smith. The Scroll of Wishes was a good item. It could be used to attain millions of wealth, kill a legendary creature, or even build your own kingdom. Each was no doubt a fine choice. But Lin Li constantly felt that using it to become a professional guru was the wisest choice of all. Lin Li took a look at the fading rainbow. Slowly, he picked up the remaining materials for training and kept them in his bag. After witnessing a miracle, the players no longer had the thoughts of banditry in their minds. They watched dumbstruck as Lin Li packed the materials, but no one dared to move an inch. Someone who could produce numerous top-graders at hand and spend millions of gold coins by the knock of a hammer and a shake of the medicinal bottle was not someone they could afford to mess with. Other things aside, he could simply employ someone for a few thousand gold coins to wipe them off their accounts. Banditry? More like suicide. After putting all the materials in his bag, Lin Li planned to switch to his hunter account for a good talk with the onlookers. but then, all of a sudden, a sharp siren sounded. An unknown failure occurred in the system. All players are requested to go offline immediately. An unknown failure occurred in the system. All players are requested to go offline immediately. An unknown failure occurred in the system. All players are requested to go offline immediately. The siren sounded thrice. Lin Li was about to go offline when he realized he had lost control of his character. He had yet to grasp the situation when the feeling of losing control extended to his own body. It felt as if his soul and body were being separated. He could see himself, but couldn't feel his existence. The surroundings became soft and velvety. No matter how he struggled, he could not break away from the hopeless sense of impotence. Lin Li gradually felt his stream of consciousness floating away. He could even see another image of him lying sluggishly on the chair. Lin Li jerked his head up in horror. It was pitch black above him, real darkness, without a hint of foreign matter. Even if there was a sliver of light shining into it, it would be devoured by the endless dark, with nothing left behind. Which despicable fellow hid a black hole in my house? The question popped up in Lin Li's head before the last bit of his consciousness faded into the darkness. Lin Li woke up in a log cabin. Probably due to the hasty construction, the cabin looked a tad shabby. There was no furniture except for a chair and a bed in the room. The door was unlatched and a pungent odor of medicine wafted through the crack in it, so Lin Li could not open his eyes for a long time. The bull's strength potion? But it doesn't smell quite right. Lin Li took a few sniffs and pondered for a long time before he finally understood. Damn. It's a failed one, no wonder it didn't smell right to me. But who's the genius adding leaves from the wisdom tree to the potion? Was he not satisfied that the conflicting smell of the combination of the 4 ingredients was not strong enough? The concoction was just a high-grade potion. A pharmaceutics guru like Lin Li could easily find out the reasons for failure just by taking a whiff. But it didn't mean anyone else could. He had yet to sit up from the bed when he heard an exasperated grunt through the crack in the door. Impossible. There was no mistake this time, how could it fail again? Is there a problem with the ingredients? Yes, there must be a problem with the ingredients. Great. This dang old man, selling counterfeit goods at my doorstep. I'll make sure you give me my money back. Another fit of temper from the owner of the voice. Lin Li was just about to cover his ears and go back to sleep when the door that was unlatched swung open. An old man in his 60s or 70s stood behind the door. He had white hair and a face full of wrinkles, but his actions were full of vigor, displaying no signs of old age at all. He wore a long white robe dappled with stains, probably due to the frequent use of potions. There were black and blue traces everywhere on his robe, which made it look kind of messy. Kid, I know you're awake. Stop pretending you're asleep and get up quickly. The old man pushed the door open and sat on the vine chair in a huff. In his mind, he was probably still thinking about the failed bull's strength potion. I just woke up. Lin Li knew that the old man was fuming, so he hurriedly turned over and climbed out of the bed. However, the look on Lin Li's face changed the moment he uncovered his quilt. The robe of wrath. He was actually wearing the robe of wrath. It was indeed the robe of wrath. Lin Li was sure he couldn't be wrong. In order to attain this legendary robe with a space to hold 30 scrolls in it, he had spent almost 40,000 gold coins along with a piece of epic equipment and had barely managed to obtain this remarkable magical robe. It can't be this odd. Lin Li raised his right hand nervously, thinking he must have seen it wrong. There couldn't be a ghost in broad daylight. However, the ring on his thumb proved yet again that his vision was fine. The ring of endless storm, with mythical space being its most singular attribute, possessed an almost infinite space in it. It was said that there was a big secret hidden in the ring. Lin Li attained 2 mythical equipment pieces when he went into the Well of Sun, the Stars of Fury held by the Hunter and the Ring of Endless Storm right in front of him. The ring was just too familiar for Lin Li to remember it wrong. Looking at the robe of wrath he was wearing and the Ring of Endless Storm on his finger, Lin Li felt that he had no need to open the portal to the other dimension again. He was certain that it contained over 100 pieces of dragon skin and over 20 pieces of divinity metals, along with the numerous top-grade equipment and materials he had accumulated previously. What? What kind of damned situation is this? In fact, he had vaguely guessed that something bizarre must have happened to him when he had woken a while back. But he would never have guessed it would be strange to this point. The entirety of the endless world actually appeared in reality. Both the Robe of Wrath and the Ring of Endless Storm were equipment from the endless world. They were only statistics, but now these statistics were present in the real world. Everything felt so real. The Robe of Wrath was constantly emitting its peculiar warmth, and the Ring of Endless Storm lay quietly on his thumb. Lin Li could totally feel that he could open up the near-infinite space that was in the ring with just a thought. May I ask where in the world this place is? Lin Li's voice was so hoarse that it surprised him. He was afraid the old man would mention a place he was familiar with. A load of data appearing in the real world was not frightening. What was really frightening was him becoming a load of data, just like the plot that often appeared in horror movies. A wisp of resentful soul sojourning in the network, relying on various killing websites to find a substitute. You don't even know this place? The question was nothing out of the ordinary, but the old man stared with eyes wide open. I don't know, Lin Li nodded honestly. Then what are you here for? This is the Sunset Mountains, one of the most dangerous places in the south of the Emerald Continent. Even an old fellow like myself would only dare to come here for a few days' stay every July. You little kid, you have guts, swaggering into the place without even knowing where this is. Lin Li knew it was a big deal when he heard the unfamiliar name of the Emerald Continent. Other than transmigration, he had no other explanation for it. However, even Lin Li himself felt a little strange. For no reason at all, he had become a transmigrator, and yet he felt relieved. The first thing on his mind was, surprisingly, something else, for he thought, transmigration it is. Better than becoming a resentful soul on the internet. Alright, kid, though I don't know why you came here. The old man glanced at the celestial cane placed on the side of the bed, and with an impatient look on his face, turned to face Lin Li, and of course have no wish to know why. In any case, the Sunset Mountains are not a place for excursions. If you're looking for some thrill or would like to train yourself out of boredom, then I'll offer you one advice. Go back where you come from and don't ever come seeking death in the Sunset Mountains again. Not waiting for any reaction from Lin Li after he finished his sentence, he stretched out his hand and pushed the unlatched door open, once again burying himself among his beakers and test tubes. You're the one looking for thrill, your whole family is looking for thrill. Lin Li stared at the unlatched door as he cursed bitterly in his heart. It was only after cursing that he felt sorrowful again. Transmigration had become his reality, but this was an entirely foreign world and he had not grasped even the most basic concepts of it. To go back where he had came from. He'd like to go back indeed, but how? Moreover, what the old man said at the end sounded like an admonition and a threat. It didn't sound too good, but Lin Li understood the meaning behind it. The Sunset Mountains were definitely not a peaceful place. Now that he couldn't even tell the directions here, mishaps could happen if he just walked out of the place foolishly. You only have 10 minutes. If I find that you're still not packed and gone by the time I complete this bottle of bull's strength potion, don't blame me for chasing you out. Lin Li had yet to come to a decision on his part, but the old man outside the door was not at all polite, directly chasing him out. Lin Li took a smell of the medicine and knew the old man had added leaves from the wisdom tree once again. If I were you, I'd be in a hurry to scoop those 2 leaves out. Otherwise, not to mention 10 minutes, the beaker in your hand will explode once again in less than 10 seconds. Lin Li's laugh sounded unusually nasty. Pack your stuff immediately and get out of my house. The angry roar had yet to die down when a muffled sound of explosion was heard from behind the door. A plume of smoke followed and the pungent smell of medicine wafted through the door's crack, and Lin Li found it hard to open his eyes again. Then the door was flung open and the old man rushed in, completely ignoring that his head was covered in bruises from the explosion. He grabbed Lin Li and demanded, "Speak. How did you know it would explode?" What's so strange about it? Lin Li maintained his nasty smile and broke off mid-sentence. With his finger, he pointed at his collar where the old man was grabbing. Sorry, I was too agitated. The old man laughed embarrassedly. He released him somewhat awkwardly and smiled as he helped Lin Li straighten his crumpled collar. Actually, the reason is too simple. Lin Li smiled in contentment. He took a seat on the vine chair and began. There are 4 main ingredients for the bull's strength potion. They are the Dracaena grass, the 1000-knot vine, the nightmare flower, and the troll's blood. The medicinal properties of the ingredients clash with one another, but there is a delicate balance between them. It is not wrong to add some supplementary ingredients to improve its medicinal properties, but something like the leaves of the wisdom tree. I can only say you're too smart for your own good. Although the leaves are usually used to balance the conflict between ingredients, their other effect is to calm the mind. Putting a herb with calming effects into a potion that strengthens the body is like putting a cat into a rat's cage. So this is it, I've thought. A master's knowledge of medicine meant one could speak of these as easily as if having all the words at hand. The old man was completely convinced by Lin Li's eloquence, but at the same time, he couldn't help but size up Lin Li with an odd look. He couldn't quite figure out the kid in front of him anymore. He possessed an almost perfect talent in magic, but was extremely weak. He'd figure Lin Li was at the standard of a level 1 mage at most. But, coming to the Sunset Mountains alone, he had too much guts to be called a rookie. But what really eluded him was the kid's ability to explain the principles of the bull's strength potion. He was not really a master in potion crafting himself, but the bull's strength potion was an ancient potion recipe he got from the High Elf's relics. Not to mention average pharmacists, it was impossible to find information on the power of the bull's strength potion even in the Amro Pharmacists Association. But coming from the kid's mouth, it sounded like it was something common and easy to understand, just like buying vegetables from the market. At the thought of this, the old man could not help but wonder if there was any justice in this world. When Lin Li finished explaining the principles of the bull's strength potion and began analyzing the pros and cons of similar potions, the old man watched him as if Lin Li was a dinosaur. The old man had completely forgotten about wanting Lin Li to leave. Looking at the darkening sky outside the log cabin, the old man was eager to invite Lin Li to stay, and even prepared a sumptuous dinner for him. After rounds of beating around the bush during dinner, Lin Li was gradually able to make out a general outline of the unfamiliar world in his mind. This was a world of swords and magic. The old man in front of him, whom he had come to know as Anduin, was a mage by profession, and a powerful one at that. Although Anduin did not elaborate on how powerful he was, Lin Li could tell from his confident tone that this somewhat unkempt old man was definitely more powerful than he had imagined him to be. Lin Li stayed in the Sunset Mountains for the following month. Other than occasionally guiding Anduin in pharmaceutics, he spent most of his time learning magic. He discovered he had a gift in magic, and even old Anduin, who had lived for over 100 years, had to admit he had never seen someone with such an exceptional talent in magic as Lin Li. Lin Li mastered 3 kinds of elementary magic in 3 days. This unbelievable progress got Anduin doubting if there was any justice in this world. He had spent a month getting into meditation and had been praised by his teacher for being a genius at that. Then, what would become of the guy in front of him? Was he a monster or a maniac? Only Lin Li would know how he came to possess such near-demonic gift in magic. It probably had something to do with the attributes of the mage smurf, high levels of mental and intellectual abilities. It was all thanks to these demonic attributes that he could easily understand highly complex spells and arrange magic elements without effort, as if he was born knowing it. He could recite any complex spell with ease just by hearing it once and learn the order of magic elements in the shortest time, no matter how difficult they were. Anduin ceased teaching any new magic skills when Lin Li mastered the 10th elementary magic. Instead, he got him to practice the sequencing of the 10 elements. Though tedious training made one lose interest quickly, Lin Li showed no signs of annoyance. He knew very well that despite being a terrible pharmacist with a nasty temper, old Anduin was undoubtedly an authoritative figure in the field of magic. His opinions might not be precise, but it was far better than having himself, an amateur, fumbling about on his own. The tedious training continued for a month, until one morning. Like any other days after breakfast, Lin Li resumed his training on elemental sequencing. This was not the conventional way of magic training. Usually, the mage would start off with sequencing the magical elements, and then unleash the magic through reciting a spell. But Anduin had adopted a different approach in his teachings. He made Lin Li summon the magical elements and had them arranged by making use of Lin Li's mental strength. Instead of unleashing the magic through spell, he jumbled them up and made Lin Li go through the whole process repeatedly until his mental strength finally wore off. On other days, Anduin would keep himself busy in the pharmaceutical lab after breakfast. However, he stayed in his room that day and quietly watched Lin Li train. It made the latter uncomfortable to know that someone was watching him, so he stopped and looked at the old mage as he asked, "Have you learned the formula of the clarity potion I taught you a few days ago?" Not yet." Anduin turned red in embarrassment when asked about the clarity potion. Indeed, when compared to Lin Li's extraordinary gift in magic, he had nothing to show in regards to his talent in pharmaceutics. Lin Li had demonstrated over 10 times the making of a simple clarity potion, but he still could not get a grasp on it till this day. In fact, he nearly caused an explosion in the lab just the day before. No matter how thick-skinned Anduin was, he blushed involuntarily at the mention of the topic. "Are you all right? Why haven't you been able to master it yet?" Lin Li's expression that was clearly one of someone who'd expected better from Anduin made the latter wish he had a hole to crawl into. "So, what are you waiting there for instead of going back to the lab? Do you need my demonstration again?" "No need for it, I'll study it myself." Anduin rubbed his hands awkwardly. After a few moments, he seemed to recall his goal. Putting on a serious face, he said, "Let's not talk about this today, I have something to tell you." Oh? They had been together for more than a month, yet this was the first time Lin Li saw Anduin serious. He could not help but be curious. They stepped out of the log cabin. Anduin thought for a long while before asking Lin Li, "Do you know why I stopped teaching you new spells, and instead had you practice elemental sequencing?" "No," Lin Li replied honestly. "I know nothing about magic anyway. I'll just practice whatever you ask me to, surely you won't harm me. You kid have some conscience at least." Anduin nodded with satisfaction, a relieved smile on his aged face. "I have lived for over 100 years and have never seen anyone as gifted as you. You are a monster, kid. I think even the legendary Josa couldn't have been more gifted than you are." "Josa?" Lin Li knew he was gifted, but he had never imagined he'd be this powerful. He knew more or less from the old man who Josa was. He was the most powerful mage in the Dark Ages, the strongest of mortals nearest to the divine. The god of mages who single-handedly defeated the entire magic legion of the High Elves. Lin Li could never have imagined his own magical gifts to be this strong. But don't get too excited just yet. Seeing how bewildered Lin Li looked, the old mage chortled. "Talent is one thing, but achievements are another. From what I see, you are inferior to Josa in at least 2 ways. First of all, you are not focused enough. In magic, only people who are absolutely focused can achieve real success. Too much knowledge is sometimes not a virtue. Take pharmaceutics as an example. You know that better than those old fellows from the Pharmacists Association at such a young age. A lot of energy is spent on pharmaceutics. How much time would you have to study magic? What's really deadly is the second aspect. You've been exposed to magic too late." According to the records of the Dark Ages, Josa was born into a family of mages. His parents were famous mages of the Dark Ages. He had been exposed to magic from birth. By the time he got to your age, he had already surpassed the standards of a magic shooter, and you're just beginning to learn the lowest level of magic. While a late start can be compensated for by talent, it does not give you a solid enough foundation. There are no shortcuts in the world of magic, and all powerful spells are nothing but talk until a solid foundation is laid. That is why I stopped teaching you new magic." At this point, Anduin laughed guiltily. "Actually, at the beginning, I just wanted to make an exchange. You'd guide me in pharmaceutics, and I'd help you in magic. Though it might not be much help, it shouldn't be a problem for you to reach the level of a magic shooter within 10 years. But I soon regretted it. Your talent is too great, such talent may not appear for thousands of years. I can't bear to see you going down the wrong path, so instead of teaching you new spells, I let you practice the most basic sequencing of elements every day. Never underestimate the tedious practice. Every world has its own rules, and the world of magic is no exception. After more than a month in this unfamiliar world, Lin Li felt warmth for the first time. He bowed to Anduin respectfully and said, "Thank you." After the long talk with Lin Li, Anduin seemed to have forgotten about the matter. As usual, he spent his time in the potion lab, making Lin Li's blood run cold with the things he did from time to time. Lin Li had been wondering whether the stubborn old man would be blown up one day. But for the time being, his body was still intact, despite being subjected to various accidents every day. It was not until the 7th day after the long talk that the stubborn old man, who was still in one piece, called Lin Li out of the log cabin. "How about helping me?" For reasons unknown, Lin Li constantly felt that the smile on the old man's face was somewhat sinister. But thinking it over, he had been living as a freeloader for the past month and still had magic to learn from him. It was hardly justifiable if he couldn't even offer a little help. Hence, he braced himself and replied, "Tell me about it. I'll do my best to help if it's within my means." "Actually, it's no big deal," Anduin rubbed his hands embarrassedly. "You know, I've been unlucky these days. There have been many accidents in the lab for a few days in a row. Although the accidents weren't serious, they cost me a lot of ingredients." "Afraid it's not just bad luck," Lin Li muttered to himself. After living here for more than a month, he could see that old Anduin's attainments in magic were truly unparalleled. But in pharmaceutics, he was worse than an apprentice who had just started out. An apprentice would at least learn how to do it gradually, but Anduin completely ignored the proper steps and chose to take up challenging tasks from the beginning. Now that there was a potion master around to clean up whatever trouble he caused, the old man became more brazen in his actions, making it seem as if there was spring festival celebration every day in the lab. If there were no explosions someday, it would be because the old man had taken the wrong medicine. But, fortunately, I did an inventory count this morning. Most of the ingredients are no problem, only the wild steelbloom stock suffered the biggest losses. Only a large number of wild steelbloom was lost. That was indeed a stroke of good luck in the midst of bad. Compared to the leaves of the wisdom tree, wild steelbloom was much more common. The only condition for its growth was shade. The darker and damper the place was, the more it thrived. Such environment could be found anywhere. There were countless such places just in the Sunset Mountains alone. "So, you want me to?" Lin Li had guessed what Anduin was about to say. Thinking it was not a big deal picking wild steelbloom for him, and that there was nothing else he could do but practice elemental sequencing anyway, Lin Li answered coolly, "No problem. If you can't excuse yourself for the moment, it'll be the same if I go and pick some for you." "Thank God," old Anduin heaved a sigh of relief and explained rather embarrassedly, "I am waiting for some very important news these days. It's really hard to find time to go." "It's great that you're willing to help." After inquiring about the location where the wild steelbloom grew, Lin Li went out without much delay. It was the first time he wandered far from Anduin's cabin since having transmigrated here. Walking in the dark forest, Lin Li felt complicated emotions. He was split between curiosity and nervousness. Being both curious and nervous, Lin Li naturally could not have noticed that Anduin had recited a spell the moment the former stepped out of the cabin. Following the completion of the spell, a figure of Lin Li began to emerge on the crystal ball in front of him. According to Anduin, not far away, only a few minutes of walk from the log cabin, was a spot where the wild steelbloom grew. It was said that the place had once been the nest of manticores, but they had died out during the last black tide. No one knew which demons had killed them, and even Anduin could only guess based on the traces in the surroundings. According to him, they had probably encountered their nemesis, the black dragon, during the black tide. Lin Li stood outside the nest. It had only been a year, but the nest was completely deserted. There were weeds all around and a bed of wild flowers bloomed in brilliance at the entrance of the cave. Lin Li could only feel a rush of cold, damp air on his face as he approached the overgrown cave. As soon as Lin Li came near, he knew he had not found the wrong place. The cave was dark and damp, the perfect place for wild steel bloom to grow. As in most places where the wild steel bloom grew, the cave entrance was dark and damp, and the surrounding stone walls so slippery it almost felt like touching a giant python. There was no light in the darkness ahead. Lin Li had no choice but to light a torch and explore the depths of the cave with it as his only source of light. In fact, Lin Li saw a sea of wild steel bloom not long after entering the cave. But he did not pick any, and instead continued to explore with the torch in his hand. It was because he remembered that there was another herb which had the same habitual nature as the wild steel bloom, the ghost skin. It preferred dark and damp environment, and mostly grew in caves. However, the ghost skins were buried deeper and hidden better than the wild steel bloom. Lin Li's experience told him that the ghost skins were more likely to be found where the wild steel bloom flourished best. He wanted to find out whether his past experiences could be applied to this world. So, he didn't even look back. The route ahead seemed to be getting wider. It was only a small cave when he just came in, but as the forest grew deeper, the cave seemed to have turned into a maze. Lin Li circled the maze for a long time and went through one passage after another before he suddenly saw light ahead. It was a stretch of underground wilderness, empty and vast. Seas of wild steel bloom prospered on the wildland. The blaze of purple and red was interspersed with dots of gray, the color of ghost skin. Lin Li felt his heart leap upon seeing the little gray dots among the flowers. No one in this world could ever understand how Lin Li felt at the moment. Not even Anduin, who was the closest to him. His experience in the endless world could be adapted to the world of Anrel. What did this imply? This implied that in the world of Anrel, Lin Li was also a master of all professions. It included not just professions like pharmacy, metallurgy, and forging. It was more on the knowledge aspect, like the knowledge of herbs, he also had a mastery level in it. It was not until the ghost skins had been gathered that Lin Li was able to contain his excitement. This was probably what made him the happiest since he had transmigrated. Lin Li knew very well what it meant to be a master of all professions. It was almost like being an omnipotent Superman. With a background like that, his future in this unfamiliar world seemed to become clearer. It took Lin Li almost an hour to gather all the ghost skins from the underground wildland. Even with his assets, he was not willing to let go of any of it. Compared with the wild steel bloom, ghost skin had too many uses. Besides refining the wisdom potion, it could also be found in potions that had broader applications, like the hastening potion and fossilizing potion. Wild steel bloom was also picked by him on the way. But a herb master like Lin Li would not be interested in that kind of cheap herb. He simply picked some, thinking it'd be enough for the old fellow to squander away, and refused to waste any more energy bending over his back. Lin Li was about to leave the cave after finishing his errand when he inhaled a foul stench. The stench was thick with blood, like a pool of fresh, viscous blood. Lin Li had yet to regain his composure when a low roar came from behind him. He turned his head in a hurry, just in time to see a dark red shadow lurking there. F***ck. Just as Lin Li turned around, the dark red shadow sprung on him along with a gush of foul wind like a horde of ferocious wolves. It was fortunate that Lin Li had been living in Anduin's log cabin for more than a month. In this past month, though he had only learned 10 low-level spells, he was far more adept in his execution of the spells than an average mage. Lin Li pulled back before the red shadow came close and began reciting the delaying spell in haste. After unleashing the delaying spell, he quickly recited the illuminating spell. What was originally a low-grade magic spell used for lighting released an extraordinary power in this dark and damp cave. A cry of horror ensued, the savage beast was badly wounded. Lin Li took advantage of this opportunity and retreated another dozen steps. In the blink of an eye, the distance between them had been drawn to a safe one. Only then did Lin Li have the chance to see the appearance of the monster that had attacked him from behind. It was a dark red lion with a tail that was much longer than the average lion's. The tail had an inverted hook at the end, giving off a faint blue shimmer under the afterglow of the illuminating spell. Lin Li could see clearly that it had attacked neither with its claws nor teeth a while ago, but instead swooped in on him with the inverted hook on its tail. Even if Lin Li had been blind, at this moment, it would still have been clear to him as day. It was a manticor, the level 5 magical beast that Anduin had mentioned. Old bastard Anduin, Lin Li cursed between clenched teeth, paying greetings to all 18 generations of Anduin's family in his heart. How irresponsible of the old fellow, sending him to the cave lightly without having any idea whether there were any manticores inside. In the little log cabin, Anduin watched the scene on the crystal ball and blurted out a praise. Nicely done. Lin Li's performance was far beyond his expectations. He was calm yet efficient. Even when the manticore's tail was right in front of him, he never stopped reciting of the delaying spell. The illuminating spell that followed right after was even more so a stroke of genius. Even Anduin himself had not thought that the illuminating spell could be put to such use. Dealing damage to a level 5 demon with a level 1 spell was a feat that even Anduin himself had not accomplished. With the delicate touch of the illuminating spell, it brought the distance between Lin Li, who had been just exposed to magic for barely more than a month, and the level 5 beast infinitely close. The badly wounded manticore was still ferocious. But it had lost both its eyes, so most of the time it was merely expressing its anger and malice. Wild roars echoed throughout the cave, the strikes that seemed like lightning came down repeatedly, most of the time missing their target. Lin Li was constantly struggling to keep up amidst the relentless attacks. The delaying spell was used alternately with the hastening spell, allowing Lin Li to escape from the lion mouth again and again. He seemed a little clumsy with this. But Lin Li knew that all he needed was a chance. A chance for him to recite his spells. Lin Li had waited for long before he finally got his chance. He'd even exposed himself to the claws of the manticore for this opportunity. It was because he knew very well that the most terrifying thing about the manticore was not its claws, but the inverted hook at the end of its tail. After unleashing another delaying spell, Lin Li suddenly broke his stride. He did not turn and run after unleashing the delaying spell like how he did before. This time, he stood rooted to the spot, and large verses of spells poured out of his mouth as if he had not noticed the advancing manticore right in front of him. There was a thick smell of blood carried by the manticore's roar. Lin Li could even sense the chill of its claws. Just as the claws fell, a wave of wind blade tore the air apart. Then, it tore apart the soft abdomen of the manticore as well. The cries of the manticore were filled with despair. The sharp claws were so close, so very close to tearing the body of the human in front of it apart. But it was this small distance that became a gap never to be crossed. At that moment, Lin Li had not forgotten to shoot an icicle to clog the wound of the manticore, preventing the gushing blood from spilling over Lin Li's body. The action fell into the eyes of Anduin, who deemed it a waste of power. He stomped his feet in anger and chided, "Wastrel." In the eyes of the old mage, magical power would always be the most precious of things. Even the smallest amount of power could let you unleash the last spell, enough to save your life. What Lin Li had done was a crime in Anduin's eyes, wasting his power just for the sake of keeping his clothes clean. Though, of course, there was more or less some helplessness in his scolding. Anduin knew that the kid in the crystal ball was not an ordinary mage. He was a born psychopath, a psychopath with a superdeformity of the mind. It was still unclear to Anduin where the limit of the kid's mental strength was. All he knew was, if another mage were to practice the highly intense elemental sequencing daily, it would probably take him less than an hour to tire out and return to his room to meditate. But Lin Li was perfectly fine. The kid's mental strength seemed to be endless. To go through how many hours of practice all depended on his mood. Anduin had only ever heard him protest in annoyance, but never out of exhaustion. That was the truth. Unleashing a few more low-grade spells had no effect on Lin Li at all. He was crouching next to the body of the manticore, studying its inverted hook with interest. The inverted hook was still shimmering with blue light, and a rush of sweet stench jolted his brain as he went closer. This was a sign of lethal poison. Lin Li had always liked stuff that carried poison because it meant a deadly force. So, without much hesitation, he pulled a dagger out of the ring of endless space and very carefully nicked the inverted hook off the tail. Then, as gingerly as ever, he put it back into the ring of endless space. Anduin was at a loss, watching the scene from the crystal ball. Was he really a mage with a knowledge of the mystical? No matter how the old man looked, he thought the kid was more like a thief instead. Regardless of how Anduin thought, Lin Li came back safe and sound with a pile of wild steel bloom. I need an explanation. Lin Li was still brooding over the encounter with the manticor in the cave. What is magic to you? Anduin did not explain, but instead posed a question. A kind of skill, a skill that will allow your strength to become more powerful. The present Lin Li was not the piece of clear rock that knew nothing when he first came to this foreign world. He had developed his own understanding of magic under the influence of Anduin. Then, what is the purpose of making your power stronger? To kill? Lin Li suddenly understood some of it. That's right. Anduin smiled, feeling pleased. In the eyes of the mortals, magic is a skill that is mysterious yet elegant. But to a real mage, the only purpose of magic is to battle. A mage that lives is a mage that's really successful. You have learned enough low-grade spells this past month, and obtained a certain degree of skills. But it's far from enough. Without the experience of life and death, and the shower of fresh blood, you will never become a true mage. So you didn't tell me there was a manticore in the cave on purpose? Anduin's reply was simple. It's just a level 5 beast, there's no need for a special reminder. If you're enjoying my content, please consider donating a coffee. Or checking out my shirts on TeePublic. In the following few months, Anduin frequently lacked in herbs. Using this as an excuse, Lin Li was frequently called upon by Anduin to fight different types of magical beasts. From manticor to a three-eyed blood wolf, then from thunder beast to a bloodthirsty lizard. In slightly over a month, Lin Li killed literally all the magical beasts of the Sunset Mountains that were of level 7 and below. After struggling in battle with a highly invasive manticore initially, Lin Li eventually could easily kill a level 6 beast. Lin Li only possessed 10 low-level magic spells, however, he was clear that he had become stronger. In the opinion of Anduin, Lin Li had begun to feel more like a real mage. Each time he peeked through the crystal ball to observe Lin Li's battles with the creatures, Anduin always felt that Lin Li felt distant and unfamiliar again. From the beginning, Anduin believed that inexperience could be overcome, just like an inexperienced archer hiding in the distance becoming an experienced mage using magic to control the situation to make the enemies die in despair and helplessness. This transformation took only a month for Lin Li. It should be known that, in the current Guild of Magic, there were still quite a few who wore the hat of the wizard but were doing the work of an archer. Lin Li's improvement was indeed so quick that it was unbelievable for an old mage like Anduin. Mentioning the inexperienced Lin Li slightly a month back would only make Anduin feel strange and distant. 3 days ago, in a battle with the Thunder Beast, Lin Li completely rid himself of the shackles of the spell recitation through performing the delaying spell merely with a gesture of a hand. The old mage began to feel distressed. What else can I still teach him? Anduin stared at the crystal and pondered for a long time, asking himself what other skills he was able to teach Lin Li. Although it was only the delaying spell, it brought shock to Anduin as it felt like a spell over level 18. He remembered very clearly, when he'd first unleashed his low-leveled spell, he was 30 years old and had just become a mage. In the following few days, Anduin was troubled as he was completely clueless what else he could teach Lin Li. Because of his troubles, Lin Li managed to get a few days of a rare break. After Lin Li practiced elemental sequencing, he sneaked into the pharmacy. Using the spirit divinity's grass that he had obtained a few days back, he made himself a few bottles of hastening potion. Anduin had forbidden him to use such stuff since quite a while ago, as too much reliance on medications, drugs, or foreign objects would inevitably affect his improvement in magical capabilities. However, today he noticed that the old mage, Anduin, seemed to be distracted. While Lin Li was busy in the pharmacy lab, the old mage would usually come in to check instead of staring distracted out at the window. The old mage only returned back to his normal state when a few bottles of hastening potions were completed. How many times have I told you that too much reliance on medication will only bring you more damage than benefits? Why are you not listening to my advice? Upon saying that, Anduin heaved a sigh. Forget it. In the future, I will not be able to supervise you over the crystal ball every day. Perhaps the medication will be able to save your life when you meet with some trouble. What happened? For the past few days, Lin Li felt that Anduin's attitude was weird. Now that he heard the old mage utter such a thing, Lin Li hastily became aware of it and was so stunned that he even forgot to keep those hastening potions that he had made. At that time Anduin began to look pale. He held on to the chair, slowly sat down, and placed the crystal ball, which he had never allowed to be out of his sight, aside. Thereafter, he did not answer Lin Li's question. Instead, he asked, "Have you been staying here for 3 months?" "About there," Lin Li answered distractedly. He curiously stared at Anduin as he realized that the old mage looked pale and tired today. "When I found you, I did not realize that I have found a magic genius." The old mage laughed, his husky voice tinged with emotion. "Until now, I still can't believe that you have never learnt magic before. That was due to limited conditions, because nobody could teach me. I know that you carry some secret and you have no intention to share it. I have no intention to probe either." He brushed off Lin Li's true reply as an excuse with a wave of his hand, indicating that Lin Li did not need to explain anything. Anduin then said to himself, "In the beginning, I just could not bear to see you waste your talent. At that time, I did not expect that you could have done so well. It wasn't until the last 2 days that I realized I have nothing more to teach you." Lin Li wanted to humbly say a few words of consolation, however, he realized that the atmosphere was not right. He thought to himself, might as well keep my mouth shut and listen conscientiously to what Anduin has to say. For the past 2 days, I have been pondering what else I could teach you. It wasn't until this morning that these questions could no longer trouble me. This morning, I received a letter from an old friend. In his letter, he stated that there is a very important thing that he requires my help in. "So you are ready to chase me off?" "Basically, that is the case." After finishing what he had to say, Anduin pulled out a thick envelope from his mage robe. "In any case, by continuing to stay in the Sunset Mountains, you will not be able to learn anything useful anymore. Why don't you let me recommend you to another place? There, you can choose to continue to learn something more, or do the things you have always wanted to do." "What place is it?" "Take this letter to the Josa city's Guild of Magic and look for someone by the name of Jirian. He will help you to arrange everything." Anduin handed the thick envelope to Lin Li. "By the way, there seems to be some problem with your identity." "It won't matter, because if you don't wish to use your original identity, you can use the one I have prepared for you. The information is in the envelope. You just have to take some time to memorize it." "Thank you." After listening to the old mage's gentle and thoughtful exhortation, Lin Li suddenly felt that his eyes were moist. In order to lighten the atmosphere, he gave a reluctant smile and asked, casually, "When are you planning to leave?" "About half an hour later." The old mage laughed and gave Lin Li a pat on his shoulder. "It wouldn't matter as this will not delay me too much. I guess I will probably be able to head to Josa City after a week or 2. When that happens, I will bring you to my private pharmacy. I had hidden a purple set of crystal beakers. It's a treasure that I have gotten at a great value." Subsequently, Lin Li could no longer remember what Anduin had said. It was only when Anduin's back disappeared into the distance that Lin Li suddenly recalled an important matter. With Anduin's long-winded instructions still ringing in his ears, Lin Li had to feel his way through the dense forest alone. As he fumbled along the way, he whined, "Did the old man make a mistake? He knew how to prepare a new identity for me, but forgot to prepare a map." Anduin was probably the only person in this world who understood Lin Li best. He knew there was a problem with Lin Li's identity, so he had prepared a new one for him. But perhaps he would never have thought that it had not been just a problem of troublesome identity for this fellow. In fact, he had none at all. The Sunset Mountains stretched for thousands of miles. How could Lin Li, who had come from another world, find his way out? Anduin was not to be blamed for his negligence. Who would have expected that a magic genius skilled in pharmaceutics could have such weak sense of direction? Barely a day after Anduin had left, Lin Li packed up all his stuff. However, it had been 10 days, and he had yet to figure out the bearings in the Sunset Mountains. The woods were dark and gloomy, and the ground was covered with decaying leaves. His feet sank with every step he took, as if he was walking on mud. The rancid smell was so disgusting that Lin Li had trouble keeping his eyes open. Specks of faint green light flitted in the dark, while the incessant howls from the wolves struck fear into Lin Li's heart. Lin Li had been walking around in this forest for 3 days. Ever since he stepped into this forest, Lin Li's spirits were permanently dampened. This cursed forest was like a huge labyrinth. Regardless of where he had started out from and how hard he had fumbled to find his way out, each time he felt exhausted and sat down to rest, he'd find the trees in front of him ever so familiar. It continued until this morning, when Lin Li finally heard some voices. Lin Li had just passed through the dense woods when, all of a sudden, he saw the leaves billow in the bushes ahead. 3 figures were hurtling through the sea of leaves. Damn. Damn. Living humans. He had always bragged about what a refined person he was, but he blurted out 2 damns within moments. He was just too excited that he actually saw 3 living humans. Although these 3 living humans might soon become dead, at least they were alive at the moment. The leaves of the bushes ahead stirred. 3 wounded people could be seen fleeing from the forest. Among them, a middle-aged man seemed to have been seriously injured. A long wound extended from his chest to his waist. Warm blood gushed out from the fresh wound, leaving a long blood trail on the ground covered with decaying leaves. A young man and a woman held on to the middle-aged man as they fled. The young man was wearing a mage robe made with fine craftsmanship. He seemed to be a mage with a good family background. In particular, the staff he held in his hand was a rather decent one even in Lin Li's eyes. Unfortunately, it was difficult for a mage to play a role in the current situation. The weak mage had become a burden with the vigorous running, hence, it was the beautiful girl with the long blonde hair looking after the 2 men most of the time. The girl, who was pretty to begin with, wore a tight red vest, which outlined an infinite lovely curve in the high-speed running. She held on to the wounded man with her left hand and carried a dagger in her right hand. The temperament she displayed as she scanned her surroundings was such that Lin Li could not help but take a few more looks at her. What was chasing them was a raging wyvern. Its rage originated from the gash on its abdomen. It was a long and deep wound, apparently left by a sharp weapon. Exciting. Lin Li stared at the wyvern fervently as it appeared. Anduin had introduced all kinds of magical beasts living in the Sunset Mountains back when he was living in his log cabin. At the mention of the wyvern, Anduin had added gleefully, "The wyvern's blood makes a good rampage potion." Of course, only Anduin would dare to say such things. For an ordinary adventurer, a level 7 magical beast would definitely have the power to turn 3 living people into dead men in a flash. Razor-sharp talons, flying at the speed of wind, and extremely corrosive acidic spout, these allowed the wyvern to have what it took to survive on the edge of the Sunset Mountains. Ordinary magical beasts like the manticores dared not provoke them. A raging wyvern spewing endless acid from the sky was probably a nightmare for anyone. Lin Li was afraid as well. But he was even more afraid of this cursed forest. If he wished to walk out of this forest, he could not let the wyvern turn those 3 into corpses. Sometimes, the reason for doing a good deed was just as simple as this. Granted, given Lin Li's character, he would make sure not to suffer any loss when he was compelled to perform a good deed. He saw the wyvern take a dive, splashing acid on the bushes. In an instant, a plume of green smoke emerged, and a burst of fizzing sounds followed. Before the green smoke could disperse, the sight of lush green trees was transformed into one of fallen branches and yellow leaves. The trio who were trying hard to escape were spared from the acid, but they had to stop in their tracks briefly to avoid it. Normally, it might not have been a problem, but at present, they happened to be under the wyvern. As the trio looked up, they saw a shadow zooming in on them, sharp talons glimmering in the dark. At the same time, Lin Li had finished the recitation of the ice armor spell. As the last of the spell broke out, a hard layer of ice armor covered the middle-aged man. While stopping the bleeding of the wound, it also made the wyvern's strike fall in vain. An excruciating pain shot up from the wyvern's talons, like having caught on to steel, and the wyvern roared in fury and agony. The trio, who were still reeling from shock, took the chance to extricate themselves from the wyvern and went on to hide in the thick grove. Then, they saw a young man wearing a mage robe walk out from the forest, reciting an unintelligible spell. A shot of icicle tore through the sky and plunged into the wound on the wyvern's abdomen. The icicle was not sharp, and would not be enough to penetrate the tough skin of the wyvern. Even if it pierced through the wound as it did this moment, this low-level spell would not deal much damage to the wyvern. The only thing the icicle could do was to aggravate the wound on its body. The initially deep, long wound was as though a ravine all of a sudden. Blood poured out like rain, and even the viscera were surging about in its abdomen. What was really fatal was that the icicle got stuck in the wound from the start. The icicle not only punctured the viscera of the wyvern, it also prevented the wound from closing. Blood flowed out gaily like from a reservoir with its gates opened. After all these, Lin Li unleashed a delaying spell to make matters worse for the magical beast. The bloodied wyvern was already at its weakest. Now that the delaying spell was cast, it was like an old bullock pulling a broken cart, trundling along. No matter how hard it struggled, it seemed that the distance of a dozen steps was a gap it could never cross. The wail of the wyvern was filled with despair, and such emotions accompanied it till it breathed its last. Oh no! After confirming the level 7 magical beast was dead, Lin Li was suddenly reminded of something. What a waste! All this blood that had been spilled could make a substantial amount of rampage potion. Upon seeing that the wyvern was dead, the wounded middle-aged man held on to the surrounding branches and struggled as he walked out of the grove. He had wanted to thank his life's savior and had just taken 2 steps when he saw the latter holding a glass bottle, desperately squeezing the body of the dead wyvern. Is there really no more? Please. Squeeze a little more, just a little bit more. At least let me make a bottle of rampage potion. His actions reminded the trio of a vampire, and sent chills down their spines. At last, it was the wounded middle-aged man who plucked up his courage and approached him with caution. Mr. Mage, thanks for your generous help. Hearing the middle-aged man's expression of gratitude, Lin Li was reminded of the proper business at hand. You are welcome, it was an act of convenience. Lin Li put the stopper back on the glass bottle that was half filled with the wyvern's blood and gingerly put it away into the pocket of his mage robe. Grinning, he introduced himself, you can call me Felix. By the way, may I ask how the 3 of you have come to provoke the wyvern? This was the new identity that Anduin had prepared for him. Lin Li had thoroughly memorized it along the way, and now said it so naturally and fluently as though Felix was his real name all along. The middle-aged man had not expected the seemingly powerful yet mysterious young mage would be this amiable and easy to approach. He was rather flattered and expressed his sincere gratitude all over again before introducing his party of 3 to him. The injured middle-aged man was called McGren, one of the many adventurers in Josa city. He had entered the Sunset Mountains after accepting a quest from the Adventurers Guild to obtain a manticore's tail. The beautiful lady with the long blonde hair was his daughter Ina. She was an adventurer just like him. As for the mage who looked like he came from a good family, McGren was vague in his introduction of him. He only mentioned that his name was Cromwell, and that he was a warm-hearted mage they had met on the way. Lin Li stifled a laugh at this. A warm-hearted mage? More like he's trying to court your daughter. Who else would be that idle, coming to the Sunset Mountains being warm-hearted and all? Everything was going well in the beginning. After a few days of search, we found a lone manticore, so we'd deployed a trap near the place where it nested this morning. A bitter smile came across McGren's face. And then, we hid in the forest, waiting for it to fall into the trap. But who knew the trap would attract 2 wyverns instead of the manticore? God knows what happened, a trap that was meant for the manticore had provoked the wyvern's attacks on us in the forest. I'd killed one of them, but was badly hurt by it before it died. Cromwell had no choice but to bring Ina and I out of the forest. And then, fortunately, we met you. If it hadn't been for you, I really wouldn't have known what to do. How unfortunate. Lin Li looked regretful, but rejoiced secretly in his heart. Luckily they had encountered the wyverns, if not, where would he have gone looking for people to lead the way? This cursed forest was much trickier to deal with than a wyvern. Lin Li felt a lot more relaxed with McGren leading the way. After all, the latter was a veteran adventurer with nearly 30 years of hunting experience. To quote McGren, in this 30 years, he had spent more time in the Sunset Mountains than in his own home. The forest that was initially like a labyrinth seemed more pleasant all of a sudden. It only took half a day for the party of 4 to walk through the dense forest. The trees ahead were gradually thinning, and the woods were no longer dark. Warm sun rays fell through the gaps in the trees and landed on their bodies. Warming up with the sun rays was Lin Li's mood. He was finally able to leave the cursed Sunset Mountains. After studying the map, McGren told Lin Li it would probably take another day to get out of the Sunset Mountains. Then what about tonight? Lin Li was somewhat worried. The Sunset Mountains were a dangerous place, and they could encounter ferocious magical beasts anytime, especially during the night, as many magical beasts that were rarely seen in the day would leave their nests then, lurking in between the ravines and waiting to pounce on the sleeping prey. Every night spent out in the open in the Sunset Mountains was equal to putting life in danger. Not a big problem. McGren looked calm. I know of a safe place. We just need to speed up. We should be able to reach it before dark. That would be great. Lin Li nodded and said nothing more. Mr. Fellick, can I ask you a question? Just as he was about to push on with the journey, the beauty with the long blonde hair hurried up to him from behind. The blonde beauty was still wearing the red vest. It revealed a gorgeous curve with her tall figure and slender legs that was further outlined by the vest. Perhaps it was due to the rush of the journey, but a tinge of red glow appeared on her fair face. Her long blonde hair hung straight and dazzled in the sun. The forest paths were narrow, so it was hard to avoid being close when two people walked side by side. Breathing in the faint scent coming from Ayane's body, Lin Li suddenly felt his head hurting. He wasn't sure what happened on the way, but the blonde beauty seemed to like asking him questions. If it were on other occasions, Lin Li would definitely be delighted. This fellow had been an otaku before he transmigrated, and he'd not met any pretty girls before. After the transmigration, all he saw was the old face of Anduin. He was not some Buddhist monk who practiced abstinence. Being approached by a pretty girl was too good a thing to ask for, so how could there be any reason to turn her away? However, the situation was giving Lin Li a headache, for he had no idea how to answer Ayane's questions. Mr. Fellick, are you from Josa City? How should Lin Li answer this kind of question? This? I guess not really. Lin Li was fretting over it when, fortunately, he thought of something else and hurried to change the topic. Oh, right. Ina, don't you need to kill a manticor for this quest? I heard Mr. McGren mention just now that you both had just laid down the trap when the wyverns discovered it. What will happen to the quest now that you had not managed to hunt down any manticor? It would be considered a failure, and I'll have to compensate some money. The topic that Lin Li had chosen wasn't bad at all. The blonde beauty finally stopped asking her questions after Lin Li had mentioned the quest. Her pretty face revealed a hint of helplessness. The manticores live in groups, so the probability of encountering a lone one is extremely low. We had followed them for a few days before coming across one, but it was ruined by the two wyverns. That was a pity, Lin Li rejoiced, while he came to a decision. When they reached Josa City, he would definitely have to come up with a flawless background. Otherwise, it would be a loss of face when he was asked by the beauty and couldn't easily engage in a conversation with her. To avoid another questioning of his background from Ina, Lin Li took the initiative to bring up some topics to chat with her. For Lin Li, the content of the conversation was not important. What was more important was not to let her have the time to raise questions. Lin Li was really good at chatting. Even a seasoned old veteran like Anduin had always felt that he was unable to outspeak him, much less an innocent girl like Ina. It took Lin Li absolutely no effort to bring the rhythm of the conversation under his control. The fellow had led the conversation, completely out of point with that half a bottle of wyvern's blood. He did not even mention the wyvern's blood first, but only casually spoke of the strength of a level 7 magical beast. The blonde beauty, full of curiosity, naturally picked up the topic. A pair of sky-blue eyes blinked inquisitively at Lin Li as she asked why he had collected the wyvern's blood at the end. With the half a bottle of wyvern's blood as a conversation starter, there were just too many topics to choose and continue from. He had heard many anecdotes from Anduin back when he had to face him all day long. Now it was easy using them to lead young girls on. In addition, Lin Li was also eloquent, and he told the stories with fine sense of humor. Occasionally, when it came to professional knowledge, he appeared profound and authoritative. Even Anduin had little to say in front of him, let alone Ina, an adventurer who only knew how to fight magical beasts, a mage who was powerful yet mysterious, humorous and witty, yet possessed extensive knowledge, was a total lady killer in front of a young girl who was just beginning to think of love. The blonde beauty walked with her head down along the forest path, listening to the interesting stories and feeling the manly aura coming from the young mage. For reasons unknown to her, she suddenly felt her face burn. Both of them were chatting merrily and had not noticed the other mage turning pale. Cromwell felt as if he was being cut by a knife. When he had first met Ina at the Adventurers Guild, he was smitten by this blonde lady with a pair of slender legs. The untamed beauty exuded by Ina had a near-fatal attraction for Cromwell, who was born into a mage family. Cromwell had used all kinds of means to win the heart of this long-legged beauty. This time, he even went with her into the Sunset Mountains, to prove this way that he was equally reliable. Cromwell felt that he was nearing success. If it had not been for Lin Li's appearance, he would have been the one to save the father and daughter pair. What irked Cromwell the most was that the sudden appearance of this mage seemed to have posed some kind of threat to him. Ina had never laughed so brightly when she was talking to him. Cromwell could not understand how that abject-looking mage could be better than him in any way. He was born into the most prominent mage family in the Felon Kingdom, and his father was someone who had a say in the Mage Association. His family was strikingly rich with the accumulation of over 1,000 years of wealth after the Dark Ages, and his uncle Ferrio had held the position of the Minister of Wealth in the kingdom all along. What did the mage Felix have? Other than being slightly younger than Cromwell, he could not even afford a decent mage robe. This person had to disappear. Cromwell stared after Lin Li's back and sneered. The party of 4 set off in the direction of Josa City, each carrying their own secrets. They had walked into another dense woods before the sun set. According to McGren, as long as they passed through this forest and walked a little farther, they would be able to see Josa City. It'll be impossible to reach it tonight, we'll just have to make do with whatever we have nearby. McGren led them forward. Very soon, they found a cave. The cave was not too deep. It took just a torch to illuminate it whole. The stone walls were exceptionally dry, and traces of bonfire could be found on the ground. It seemed that it was not just McGren who'd ever wanted to spend the night in this cave. This is the place I've mentioned earlier. Everyone can rest at ease for the night. I have stayed here for a dozen times, and not once have I encountered any danger. McGren skillfully lit up a bonfire and instructed the long-legged beauty beside him, Ina, there is a water source in the north of the forest, about 200 to 300 meters away from here. Take the water bag and fetch some water back. Yes, father. Cromwell could hardly sit still upon seeing the long-legged beauty go out of the cave. He stood hastily and said, I'll go with you. Lin Li noted that the expression of the middle-aged adventurer did not seem too good after Cromwell had chased out of the cave. Of course, he would not ask about this sort of thing. Instead, he smiled and went back to warm himself by the fire. Mr. Felix. Just call me Felix, it will do. Lin Li was rather troubled. He had mentioned it several times on the way, but McGren still insisted on calling him with honorifics. All right. Felix, is this your first visit to Josa City? I guess so, Lin Li answered vaguely. Some fellow had told me to go to Josa City to look for someone. Do you need any help? My family has been living in Josa City for decades. It would not be a difficult task to help you find someone, the middle-aged adventurer asked enthusiastically. Won't have to trouble you for now. My friend has given me an address, so it shouldn't be too difficult to find. Anduin had not really specified what the Mage Association was like. Lin Li was afraid it might be a secret organization. What would he do if they decided to kill him for bringing McGren along? After we have reached Josa City, feel free to contact me if you require any form of help. If it hadn't been for you, my daughter and I would most likely have been. McGren was immensely grateful to Lin Li for his life-saving grace. The two men were chatting away when, suddenly, a scream broke out in the distance. Something terrible has happened. It was Iona's voice. McGren's expression changed as he grabbed the weapon beside him and dashed out of the cave. Lin Li did not tarry either. He cast the hastening spell and followed after the middle-aged adventurer. The voice came from the direction of the water source McGren had mentioned before. The two men ran out of the cave back to back, just in time to see Cromwell sprinting back like a rabid dog. Monster, monster, monster took Ina away. Cromwell looked extremely wretched, his luxurious mage robe covered with mud and leaves as he gasped for breath between words. Lin Li could not help but shake his head seeing this. This fellow was indeed hopeless. It was no wonder McGren had looked displeased when he chased after Ina. If Lin Li had a daughter, he definitely would not want her to associate with a weakling like him either. What monster? Say it clearly. McGren's eyes turned red with anxiety as it concerned his own daughter. He glared feverishly at Cromwell, his eyes void of the distant courtesy he had previously. Just now, when I went with Ina to fetch water, a monster suddenly emerged from the side. It took Ina. F***ck. Lin Li dropped a swear and couldn't care less about the weakling anymore. He cast another hastening spell on himself and cut through the dense forest with the speed of wind. Behind the forest was a gentle stream, probably the water source that McGren had mentioned. Beside the stream, a water bag lay quietly on the fallen leaves. There was still some water in it, gurgling out onto the ground. Lin Li bent down and picked up the water bag. He put it by his ear and gave it a shake, promptly realizing it was still half full. They shouldn't be too far away. Then, he took a look at the footprints on the ground, which were all in a jumble. There were footprints of all sorts, big, small, deep, shallow. The small ones should have been left by Ina and Cromwell, but the big footprints made Lin Li gasp in surprise. Leviathan gorilla. Lin Li believed what he saw. These were definitely the footprints of level 8 magical beast, the Leviathan gorilla. Back when he was living in the mountains, he had seen them once or twice outside Anduin's cabin, only that old man would always make light of them as a couple of little ruffians looking for trouble that were driven away by him. Anduin could see them as little ruffians, but not Lin Li. Level 8 magical beast was no joking matter. Even in the Sunset Mountains, it was definitely in the middle of the food chain. But Lin Li heaved a sigh of relief when he identified it as the Leviathan gorilla. If it were other magical beasts, Ina would probably be dead by now. It was only when encountering the Leviathan gorilla that her life was not in danger for the time being. The Leviathan gorillas were not so keen on killing like other savage magical beasts. Just as Anduin had said, they were just a bunch of troublemakers. Ina should have been taken by a Leviathan gorilla. Leviathan gorilla? An oddity in the Sunset Mountains, a magical beast that is not keen on killing. If I'm right, Ina should be crying now, but she's not in any danger for the time being. Lin Li stared at the cluttered footprints on the ground and added softly, from the looks of the footprints, there should be only one gorilla. McGren was slightly relieved to hear that the situation was not as bad as he had imagined. The two men paid heed to Cromwell no more as they began their search by following the footprints along the stream. Lin Li had guessed it right. Still far away, the two men heard Ina crying. The cries came from a dense forest. From afar, the trees in the dense forest seemed to be particularly tall and the leaves seemed to be of utmost luxuriance. Between the tall trees were bestrewn tenacious rattans, joined together to form what looked like a giant net. Lin Li had heard Anduin mention that this was the unique way of construction for the Leviathan gorillas. They used the rattans to weave a giant net, which would cover wherever their territory expanded. To the leviathan gorilla, this giant net was both its nest and its most powerful weapon. With it, the leviathan gorilla could do many things that other high-level magical beasts could not. The long-legged beauty who was caught was currently being trapped in the giant net. "Go away. You monster, stay away from me." Aina was struggling desperately in between her cries. The two men rushed forward upon hearing her. As soon as they were under the tree, they saw Aina being tied up in the giant net. The rattan was entwined in several layers, like a Chinese rice dumpling. The leviathan gorilla, which had somehow gotten a paintbrush from somewhere, was drawing circles on Ina's face as it made weird gaggling sounds of laughter. F***ck. Lin Li suddenly got a sense of what a freak this leviathan gorilla was. As a magical beast, it had caught a human not to tear or chew her apart, but to draw circles on her face with a brush. How was that not a freak? Ina. They were father and daughter after all. McGren was as anxious as ever watching Ina wailing from under the tree. He was so anxious he had forgotten there was a level 8 magical beast on the tree. "Father, be careful." The long-legged beauty's shout had yet to settle when Lin Li heard a deafening sound followed by a muffled thud. McGren, who was just calling out his daughter's name, was knocked unconscious by a coconut that fell from the sky before he could avoid it. Kaka. The leviathan gorilla was greatly excited seeing the coconut fall onto the human. It cackled as it hopped around, and it even wiggled its bottom at the two men. With McGren's experience as a lesson, Lin Li hurried to hide behind a tree in case that darned gorilla made another sneak attack with the coconut again. Just as he was about to lean behind the tree, he suddenly felt himself being lifted off the ground. The next moment, his whole body was upside down. Damn! Lin Li had not expected there to be a hidden rattan underneath the tree where he was hiding. One end of the rattan was tied into a slipknot, while the other was in the hands of the leviathan gorilla. It only took the darned gorilla one pull and Lin Li was caught. But Lin Li reacted fast as well. He was ascending in the air at full speed, yet he was exceptionally calm. There wasn't any recitation of spell, with only a peculiar hand gesture. The sound of a wind blade piercing the air was heard. He had managed to cut off the insidious rattan with the wind blade spell. At the same time, he cast another feather fall spell on himself, and with that, Lin Li escaped from the trap at last. But what followed was another coconut volley. Who knew where the darned gorilla got the coconuts from? At least hundreds of them came smashing down in a mess. Lin Li was racked by the barrage. The leviathan gorilla was a real level 8 magical beast. A smash with a coconut thrown from its hand had knocked out even a warrior like McGren, not to mention Lin Li, who was in no sense strong. Lin Li felt as if he was being shot by a cannonball every time a coconut landed on his body. It was just too rough. The coconuts smashed down one after another, such that Lin Li could not even hold his head up. There were some opportunities in between for Lin Li to fight back, be it that 2 shots of wind blade or a few shots of icicles. But all these spells had mostly landed on the tough rattan. The leviathan gorilla controlled the giant net like it was a flexible arm. Most of the spells were actually blocked in the midst of twists and turns. Even if there were 1 or 2 spells that had gotten through the giant web and hit the leviathan gorilla, it was difficult to do any real damage to it. The resistance ability of a level 8 magical beast was poles apart from that of a manticor. For Lin Li, the effects of these spells would only provoke the leviathan gorilla's rage, causing it to smash the coconuts on him a little harder. Those numerous shots of wind blades and icicles would probably exhaust the mana of another mage. Only a freak with a serious abnormality of mental strength like Lin Li could persist under the rain of coconuts. However, even Lin Li was starting to lose heart in this situation. The strength of level 8 magical beasts was just too powerful. It was luck that they had encountered the leviathan gorilla, an oddity. If it had been other brutal and savage level 8 magical beasts, he would probably have been torn to pieces by now. By the time Lin Li had recovered his breath from the shower of coconuts, he was already covered in patches of black and blue, like a person applying various dye stuff on the body as a part of performance art. F***ck, you darned gorilla. Lin Li hid behind a tree, panting heavily as he desperately tried to come up with a plan. This darned gorilla was an absolute freak. It was a level 8 magical beast, and it had reached a frightening degree in both speed and strength. Moreover, it was fighting on its home ground. The giant net was like an impenetrable defense, even the razor-sharp wind blades couldn't sever the rattans. This was really killing him. Lin Li had just caught his breath when the leviathan gorilla on the giant net began to cackle again. Lin Li looked up just in time to see another pile of coconuts this fiend had brought back. Lin Li was distressed at the sight. If he did not get rid of the giant net, he would really be killed by those coconuts today. Hang on. Giant net? Suddenly, an idea flashed across his mind, and he felt as if he had grasped something. Just then, the leviathan gorilla launched a new round of attacks. This time, the coconut shower was more violent and brutal than before. The coconuts fell one after another, and although they did not hit Lin Li, they landed on the giant tree beside him with a loud crash. Lin Li's scalp tingled upon hearing the sound. Let's do this. There was no time for Lin Li to dwell on it in this situation. It didn't matter whether the idea would work or not, he had to do it no matter what. Lin Li finally found an empty space amidst the coconut shower. He took a leap to the side and managed to hide behind a few giant trees. The trees here were lined together, forming an excellent area for concealment. At least for the time being, the leviathan gorilla's coconuts would not reach here. After earning a temporary respite for himself, Lin Li dared not hesitate any longer. He opened up the ring of endless storm and pulled out a bottle of blue potion. It was a clarity potion made from the succus of ghost skin and leaves from the wisdom tree. It could greatly increase the scope of magic cast. Because Anduin had always objected to his excessive reliance on potions, he had only concocted 3 bottles. Lin Li's heart ached as he downed a bottle, for it meant he had 1 bottle less. After he had finished the recovery potion, Lin Li glared menacingly at the giant net above him. Darned gorilla, you've got guts, kaka. The leviathan gorilla could not care less. After a fit of cackles, it resumed drawing on Ione's face with even more joy than before. I'll tear down your lousy net and see if you can still laugh. It was the first time Lin Li took out his own staff from the space ring since leaving the log cabin. It was the only thing Anduin had gifted him, a magic staff embedded with the magical crystal of the frost troll. Lin Li had named it Winter. Holding the winter staff in his hand, Lin Li felt a familiar rush of magical wave all over his body. A low yet lengthy recitation of spell sounded among the trees. The surrounding air's temperature seemed to drop to the freezing point in an instant with the abstruse and mysterious recitation. Ina stopped crying and stared down blankly at Lin Li as she took in the powerful magical force. Even the leviathan gorilla, which was in the giant net, had forgotten its weird cackles. The inborn instinct of a high-level magical beast had told it that it was in danger. Frost. The last of the spell was broken by Lin Li, and the crystal at the tip of the staff glowed brilliantly. A wave of cold current radiated from Lin Li and swept through the giant net. Wherever the cold current passed, a vast expanse of white could be seen. Under the frigid cold brought on by the frost spell, every rattan in the range was chilled to ice. The range wasn't wide, perhaps only a few dozen meters, but it was enough for Lin Li. After the frost spell, he cast another wind blade spell. The target of this wind blade spell wasn't the leviathan gorilla in the giant net, but the rattan that was frozen to ice. Snip! The air was filled with ice flakes in the midst of jarring sounds. All the moisture in the rattan was taken away after being frozen by the frost spell. Although the wind blade spell couldn't cut through the tough rattan, it was more than enough to break ice. After a dozen shots of wind blades, Lin Li had managed to carve a hole in the giant net. The tiny hole grew in size as Lin Li continued to deliver the wind blades. By the time the hopping, cackling gorilla realized something was wrong, it was already too late. The giant net had lost its balance and was collapsing. No matter how it jumped, it could not prevent the whole net from tearing. Woo! Finally, the leviathan gorilla fell headfirst down the giant net amidst the screaming. falling with it was Ina, who was wrapped like a rice dumpling. Lin Li caught Ina before she hit the ground before turning around to cast a delaying spell on the leviathan gorilla. Without the giant net as a shield and a coconut in hand, the leviathan gorilla was no better than a toothless tiger. "That'll teach you to laugh again." Lin Li helped Ina loosen the restraints on her body, not forgetting to deliver the wind blades at the same time. For most of the day, Lin Li had to suffer from the shower of coconuts. Now that he had gained the upper hand, he was done being polite with the leviathan gorilla. Dozens of wind blades were shot out with a swoosh, such that the darned gorilla couldn't even lift its head. The wind blade spell was a low-level spell, but after breaking away from the restraint of the chant, it had become the most direct and effective mean of attack. Along with the support of an abnormal mental strength, the wind blades were like a river, flowing unceasingly. Even a powerful level 8 magical beast could not withstand the terrifying cluster of wind blades. It could rely on its tough skin to resist a couple of shots, but with dozens of wind blades flying in the air, the quantitative change had led to a qualitative change. The leviathan gorilla's tough skin had become a joke. Even the toughest of skin could not withstand the repeated cuts of countless wind blades. Woo, the cries were exceptionally tragic. Blood was seeping out endlessly from the wounds. In just the blink of an eye, the leviathan gorilla's fur was tainted red. What made matters worse was that Lin Li also used the delaying spell in the midst of those wind blades from time to time. Under the constraint of the delaying spell, the leviathan gorilla was utterly tormented. It could not flee nor catch up with him, and if it stayed grounded, it'd be ripped by the wind blades. A mighty level 8 magical beast beaten to the ground. Where did its previous arrogance go? Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.